Elijah, his very name, held a sacred vow, and his presence moved like a storm. He shut the skies, summoned fire from heaven, and defied kings without fear. But his fiercest battle wasn't against rulers or armies. It raged inside his own heart. This is the story rarely told. After King Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel descended into deep spiritual darkness. King Ahab, the most corrupt ruler Israel had ever known, and his ruthless queen Jezebel turned the nation against God. Innocent prophets were slaughtered. Idol worship spread like wildfire. Yet in the quiet land of Gilead, God was preparing. His response, Elijah, whose name meant, "My God is Yahweh." He was no ordinary man. He was a prophet of power, able to control the skies and summon divine fire. He never saw death, yet he knew the weight of fear, doubt, and crushing loneliness. For years Elijah lived in obscurity, hidden in the wilderness. He was not a priest nor a warrior, but a wild, untamed prophet whose eyes burned with the fire of heaven. Then God called him. Elijah left his mountain solitude and journeyed to Samaria, the capital ruled by Ahab. As he passed, soldiers stood frozen in place. Without announcement, Elijah entered the royal court, where Ahab sat surrounded by idols and false gods. With unwavering authority, Elijah declared, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, whom I serve lives, there will be no dew or rain for years, except by my word." Silence fell across the room. Elijah turned and vanished. Ahab sat stunned. Almost immediately, the clouds disappeared. The air grew dry. The heavens sealed shut, and God spoke again. "Go east and hide near the brook Cherith, east of the Jordan. Drink from the stream, and I have instructed ravens to feed you there." Elijah obeyed, and as the drought tightened its grip, a miracle unfolded each day. Unclean ravens brought him bread and meat morning and night. He lived alone, watching time pass while Israel withered. Wells ran dry, fields cracked, animals fell, and yet Elijah remained hidden. Ahab searched everywhere, but the prophet could not be found. Eventually, even the brook began to dry up, the drought creeping closer. One morning the water was gone. Still Elijah did not fear. He waited for God's next word. Then came the command, "Go now to Zarephath and Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow to provide for you." Was dangerous territory, Jezebel's homeland. But Elijah did not hesitate. The journey was punishing. The sun beat down on a lifeless land. When Elijah reached Zarephath's gates, he saw a frail woman gathering sticks. He knew she was the one. "Please bring me a little water in a jar too." "Drink," he asked. As she turned to leave, he added, "And bring me a piece of bread." She stopped. Her voice shook. "Surely as the Lord your God lives, I have no bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug." I was collecting sticks to prepare a final meal for my son and myself. After that, we will die. The drought had not only consumed the land, it had stolen hope from the hearts of the people. Elijah responded gently, "Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do as you said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me, for this is what the Lord promises. The jar of flour will not run out, and the jug of oil will not go dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." The woman stood at a crossroads, cling to the last of what she had, or trust the word of a stranger. She chose to believe. She returned home, baked the bread, and discovered the flour and oil still there. They ate that day and the next and continued to eat for many days to come. But then, tragedy struck. Her son became gravely ill, his breathing shallow, until he finally stopped. In anguish, the widow cried, "Have you come to remind me of my sins? Have you come just to take my son's life?" Elijah didn't answer. He took the lifeless boy in his arms, carried him upstairs, laid him on the bed, and cried out to God. Then, doing something no prophet had ever done, he stretched himself over the child 3 times and pleaded, "O Lord my God, let this child's life return to him." A heavy silence followed. Then suddenly the boy's chest rose, his lips parted. Breath returned. Elijah carried the revived child back down the stairs and gently said, "Look, your son lives." But the widow received more than just her son's life. Her faith was restored. With eyes wide in awe, she declared, "Now I truly know you are a man sent by God, and every word from your mouth carries his truth." In a land ruled by idols, true belief had sparked to life. Yet the drought continued for 3 relentless years. Hunger spread like a shadow over the nation, but not all had bowed to Baal. Among the faithful was Obadiah, the chief steward in Ahab's court. Despite working under a corrupt king, Obadiah courageously sheltered 100 prophets of God, hiding them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and providing them with food and water, risking his life every single day. One morning, as Ahab sent Obadiah to search for grass in the barren land, something unexpected happened. Amid the cracked earth and dying fields, Obadiah spotted a figure, Elijah. Overcome, he fell face down and cried, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" "It is," Elijah replied calmly. "Now go and tell your master that I have returned." Fear flashed across Obadiah's face. He pleaded for mercy, explaining how he had served the Lord faithfully since his youth and had hidden God's prophets from Jezebel's wrath. Elijah listened and stood firm. "As surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will stand before Ahab today." Obadiah, recognizing the gravity of the moment, hurried back to deliver the message. Elijah had come out of hiding. Ahab wasted no time. Beneath the burning sun, Ahab finally confronted Elijah. "Is it really you, the troublemaker of Israel?" he sneered. But Elijah answered boldly, "I haven't brought disaster upon Israel. You and your ancestors did that. When you turned from the Lord's commands and chose to worship Baal." Then Elijah issued a bold challenge. "Summon all of Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Today, we will find out who the true God is." Ahab accepted. Word spread quickly, and thousands made the climb to Mount Carmel. At the summit, nearly 1,000 prophets in rich, colorful robes stood across from one lone man, Elijah, cloaked in humility and fire. He turned to the people and asked, "How long will you hesitate between 2 choices? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him." No one responded. Elijah set the terms. "I am the last prophet of the Lord standing here. But Baal has 450 prophets. Bring us to bowls. Let them prepare one, and I will prepare the other, but place no fire under them. Then you call on your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers with fire, he is the real God." The prophets of Baal were up first. Morning to noon they cried out, jumped and danced wildly around their altar. "O Baal, answer us," they shouted. But there was no voice, no reply, only silence. Elijah couldn't help but mock them. "Shout louder. Maybe he's deep in thought, ... or busy, ... or perhaps he's sleeping and needs to be awakened." Driven by desperation, they screamed louder and slashed themselves with swords until blood poured out. The hours passed, but the heavens remained closed. Baal was powerless. Then Elijah stepped forward. The people watched in silence. He gathered 12 stones, each one representing a tribe of Israel, and repaired the broken altar of the Lord. He arranged the wood, placed the offering on top, and then did something unthinkable during a drought. "Bring 4 large jars filled with water and pour it over the altar." They obeyed. "Do it again," he said. They did a 3rd time. Water soaked the wood, drenched the sacrifice, and filled the trench, surrounding the altar. Then Elijah stood before the soaked altar and looked toward heaven. He prayed, "Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant, acting on your command. Answer me, Lord. Answer so these people will know that you, Lord, are God and that you are turning their hearts back to yourself." A profound silence followed. Then it happened. Fire fell from the sky like lightning, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench. Nothing remained but scorched earth and smoke. The crowd dropped to the ground in awe and cried out, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God," Yahweh had answered. "Not Baal." Elijah's authority was now undeniable, and the people understood the truth. The drought had been no accident, but a judgment from God. Then Elijah gave a command. The prophets of Baal were to be captured. None escaped. They were brought to the brook Kishon, where those who had led Israel astray faced justice. The nation began to be cleansed. As the moment of judgment passed, Elijah sensed something he hadn't felt in years, the faint murmur of rain in the distance. Turning to Ahab, he said, "Hurry now, prepare your chariot and descend quickly, for I hear the sound of a mighty storm." Though the skies above remained clear, Ahab obeyed. The drought had fulfilled its purpose. God was ready to release the heavens. Elijah ascended the mountain once more, dropping to his knees in prayer. His servant scanned the horizon 7 times, looking toward the sea. 6 times he returned with the same report: "There's nothing." But on the 7th attempt he cried, "A tiny cloud is rising from the Sinai, bigger than a hand." That was all Elijah needed. "Run to Ahab," he ordered. "Tell him to leave now, before the rain stops him." In moments, that small cloud expanded. Darkness covered the sky. Wind howled. And then, for the first time in 3 years, rain fell, first in heavy drops, then as a roaring flood, soaking the parched earth. As Ahab rode toward Jezreel, something astonishing happened. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Elijah. He pulled his cloak into his belt and ran with supernatural speed, outpacing the royal chariots. It was a vivid display of divine power. The man who once shut the skies now led the king, reminding the nation that Yahweh alone reigned over Israel. This downpour was more than weather, it was a lesson in faith. God had waited for Elijah's persistent prayer. 7 times he pleaded before the answer came. The drought ended, and mercy returned, but peace was fleeting. In Jezreel, Jezebel heard the news. Elijah had disgraced her and destroyed her prophets. Furious, she sent a dire message: "May the gods punish me severely, if by tomorrow I haven't done to you what you did to them." A new kind of fear consumed Elijah, deeper and darker than any before. The prophet who had stood fearless before crowds now quaked at the threat of one woman. Without seeking God, Elijah ran. He fled south, abandoning his calling. Overwhelmed by fear and despair, he collapsed beneath a solitary broom tree in the wilderness, worn out and broken. "That's enough, Lord," he groaned. "Take my life. I am no better than those who came before me." His strength was gone. His faith wavered. It wasn't just the threat. It was the crushing weight of loneliness, the disillusionment of seeing no change, no revival. The burden of standing alone in a faithless world had become too much to bear, yet, even in his lowest moment, God did not abandon him. A gentle hand touched his shoulder. Elisha opened his eyes to see an angel offering food and water. "Get up and eat," the angel said. Fresh bread and a jar of water had been prepared. Elijah ate, but lay back down, still burdened. The angel returned again, touching him with compassion. "Rise and act, your journey is not over." These words stirred something within him. The prophet who had fled was now being prepared for a deeper revelation. He traveled 40 days and nights, sustained by that heavenly meal, until he reached Mount Horeb, very mountain where God had once met Moses. There Elijah found a cave and took shelter. In the silence of that dark hollow, the voice of God came. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" Elijah's answer was full of pain. "I've been passionate for you, Lord, but your people have forsaken your covenant. They've torn down your altars, murdered your prophets, and I'm the only one left. Now they want to kill me too." His voice trembled with sorrow, but God didn't rebuke him. Instead, he invited Elijah out of the cave. Fierce wind came, tearing through the mountains, splitting rocks, but God was not in the wind. Then the earth shook violently, but God wasn't in the quake. Fire blazed across the slopes, but God wasn't in the fire either. Then came absolute stillness. A gentle whisper. Out of the profound stillness came a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible. Elijah instinctively drew his cloak over his face and stepped out of the cave. In that quiet voice was the same divine power that shaped galaxies, now speaking with the gentleness of a loving father. Again, God asked Elijah, "Why are you here?" The prophet repeated his lament, his heart still heavy. Yet something shifted. The whisper didn't rebuke or accuse, it began to mend the broken places in Elijah's spirit. Instead of condemnation, God gave him a renewed mission. Return, he said. Anoint Hazael as king over Aram, Jehu as king over Israel, and Elisha as your prophetic successor. Then came a revelation that broke Elijah's isolation. God had preserved 7,000 in Israel, faithful ones who had neither bowed to Baal nor kissed his image. Elijah's heart stirred again. He was never truly alone. Strengthened, Elijah descended from Mount Horeb with clarity. He was no longer the weary soul under the broom tree. His journey was far from over, and he would not walk it alone. Elijah obeyed God's command, came upon Elisha, son of Shaphat, plowing with 12 pairs of oxen, guiding the last with calloused hands and dust-covered clothes. Without a word, Elijah placed his own cloak upon Elisha's shoulders, a silent but sacred act that carried divine meaning. It was more than a gesture. It was a transfer of purpose, a calling from heaven. Elisha ran after him, requesting time to say farewell. To his parents, Elijah responded, "Go ahead, but remember what I've just done." Elisha returned home, but not to remain. He slaughtered his oxen, broke the wooden yoke, and burned his plow to cook the meat, feeding others as a final act before leaving. It all behind, he made sure there was no return. From that day forward, he followed Elijah as a servant and student. As time passed, Israel once again hardened its heart. Ahab, still ruled by Jezebel's influence, pursued his selfish desires. He longed for Naboth's vineyard, ancestral land passed down through generations. When Naboth refused to sell, Ahab returned home sulking and refused to eat. Jezebel, contemptuous, challenged him, "Are you not the king of Israel?" Then with cunning, she forged letters in Ahab's name, proclaimed a false fast, and arranged for Naboth to be accused by liars. They declared he had cursed both God and king. Without a fair trial, Naboth was dragged outside the city and stoned to death. Jezebel, satisfied, told Ahab the vineyard was now his. As the king went to claim his prize, Elijah stood waiting, his eyes fierce, his voice steady. "So, you found me, my enemy?" Ahab said, his tone uneasy. "Yes," Elijah replied. "I have found you because you've sold yourself to evil in the sight of the Lord." Then Elijah pronounced the judgment. "In the very place where dogs lick Naboth's blood, they will lick yours.
Ice.
Disaster will strike your house. Jezebel will be devoured by dogs. Any member of your household who dies in the city will be eaten by dogs, and those in the open fields by birds." Ahab's face turned pale. This was no mere warning, it was divine verdict. Shaken, Ahab tore his garments, dressed in sackcloth, fasted, and wept before God. The Lord saw his sorrow and spoke again to Elijah, "Because Ahab has humbled himself, I will delay the disaster until after his death. It will come upon his son instead." The justice of God was not without mercy, and even the most corrupt king found a measure of reprieve when he bowed in remorse. Years later, Ahab disregarded a prophet's warning and went to battle to recapture Ramoth-Gilead. To avoid recognition, he disguised himself, but fate could not be outrun. A stray arrow found its way through a gap in his armor, and he bled too. Death in his chariot as the sun went down. When his bloodied chariot was washed, dogs licked the blood just as Elijah had foretold. Ahab, once the most wicked king of Israel, had met his end. His son Ahaziah rose to the throne and continued in his father's corrupt ways. After falling from a high window in the palace at Samaria and suffering serious injuries, instead of turning to the God of Israel, Ahaziah sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub, the so-called god of flies in Ekron. But God intercepted. He sent Elijah to meet the messengers. "Is there no God in Israel that you must turn to Baal-zebub?" Because of this, Elijah declared, "You will not leave the bed you're lying on. You will surely die." When Ahaziah heard this message, he asked what kind of man had delivered it. They described a man wearing a hairy garment and a leather belt. Ahaziah instantly recognized Elijah. Furious, he sent a captain with 50 men to arrest him. They found Elijah sitting on a hill. With arrogance, the captain commanded him to come down. Elijah responded, "If I am truly a man of God, let fire fall from heaven and consume you and your men." Fire came down and obliterated them. Second group was sent, and the same thing happened, judgment by fire. The third captain approached. Differently, he knelt and pleaded, "Man of God, please spare my life and the lives of these men." God then told Elijah, "Go with him." Elijah went to Hazael and restated the verdict, "Because you sought answers from Baal-zebub and not the God of Israel, you will not recover." And just as Elijah had said, Hazael died. Another link in Ahab's bloodline fell under divine judgment. With no heir, the dynasty began to crumble. Even as these judgments unfolded, Elijah sensed his time was drawing to a close, not to death, but to eternity. From Gilgal, he began his final journey, accompanied by his devoted student, Elisha. At each location, Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho, and finally the Jordan, Elijah tested Elisha, saying, "Stay here." But Elisha always answered, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." At Bethel and Jericho, groups of prophets warned Elisha that Elijah would soon be taken. He replied, "I know. Keep silent." At the Jordan, 50 prophets stood at a distance. Elijah rolled up his cloak and struck the water. It parted, and they crossed on dry ground. Standing on the other side, Elijah turned to Elisha and asked, "What can I do for you before I'm taken?" Elisha asked boldly, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elijah said, "You've asked a hard thing. Yet if you see me when I'm taken from you, it will be yours." They walked on in silence, and suddenly the skies split open. A whirlwind rushed down, and a chariot of fire, drawn by horses of flame, swept Elijah up. Fire enveloped him, glory embraced him, and he was taken not by death, but into eternity. Years later, Ahab ignored the prophet's warning and went to war to reclaim Ramoth-Gilead. Hoping to outwit fate, he disguised himself in battle, but destiny found him anyway. A random arrow slipped through a gap in his armor, and as the sun set, he bled out in his chariot. When his blood-soaked chariot was washed, dogs licked up the blood just as Elijah had foretold. The most wicked king of Israel had fallen. His son, Ahaziah, succeeded him, but followed in the same corrupt footsteps. After falling from a palace, window in Samaria, and sustaining severe injuries, he chose not to seek the God of Israel. Instead, he sent messengers to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron. But God sent Elijah to intercept them. "Is there no God in Israel that you must go consult Baal-zebub?" Elijah asked. Because of this, he declared, "You will not rise from the bed you lie upon. You will surely die." When the messengers reported back, Ahaziah asked, "What sort of man told you this?" They answered, "A man wearing a garment of hair with a leather belt." At once, Ahaziah knew it was Elijah. Furious, he sent a captain with 50 soldiers to arrest him. They found Elijah sitting on a hill, and the captain commanded him to come down. Elijah replied, "If I am truly a man of God, let fire fall from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." And fire fell. Judgment was swift. Ahaziah sent another captain with 50 more. The result was the same: fire, death, silence. The third captain, however, approached with humility, fell to his knees, and pleaded for his life. "Man of God, please let my life and the lives of these 50 servants be precious in your sight." This time, God told Elijah, "Go with him. Do not be afraid." Elijah entered the palace and repeated God's judgment. "Because you sought Baal-zebub instead of the living God, you will not recover." And so it was, Ahaziah died. No heir followed him, and the house of Ahab continued to crumble under divine justice. Even as judgment rippled through Israel, Elijah sensed his own. Time was nearing not an end in death, but a passage into eternity. From Gilgal, he set out on his final journey with Elisha, his devoted student, by his side. At every stop, Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho, and finally the Jordan, Elijah tested Elisha's resolve, telling him to stay behind. But Elisha always answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as surely as you live, I will not leave you." At Bethel and Jericho, groups of prophets approached Elisha, whispering, "Do you know your master will be taken from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied. "Be silent." At the Jordan, 50 prophets watched from afar. Elijah rolled up his cloak and struck the river. The waters parted, and the two men crossed on dry ground. There Elijah turned and asked, "What can I do for you before I'm taken?" Elisha boldly answered, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elijah replied, "You have asked a difficult thing, but if you see me when I'm taken from you, it will be yours." Then, suddenly, the heavens opened, roared, and a chariot of fire drawn by flaming horses descended. Elijah was swept up into the sky, wrapped in flame, carried by glory. Elisha cried out in grief, but Elijah was gone. He had been taken into heaven without tasting death. Elijah's cloak fluttered back down to the earth a sign. A mantle passed on. Trembling, Elisha picked it up. With the cloak in hand, he walked back to the Jordan and struck the waters, shouting, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" The waters parted again. The watching prophets bowed in awe. Elisha was no longer just a servant. Elisha's spirit now rested upon him. Though Elijah had ascended, his fire remained. His voice echoed still. The judgment upon Ahab's blood-stained house was not forgotten. In the days of Elisha, that prophecy would burn to fulfillment. When the time came, God raised up Jehu, a fearless Israelite commander. Elisha sent a young prophet to anoint him, saying, "Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. You will strike down the house of Ahab and avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets. The whole house of Ahab will fall. As for Jezebel, dogs will devour her body in Jezreel." Now the young prophet vanished. Jehu returned to his men, his head still dripping with oil. "He has anointed me king over Israel," he declared. Instantly they proclaimed him king with blasts of the trumpet. The revolution had begun. Jehu rode to Naboth's vineyard, where King Joram of Israel, Ahab's son, and Asaiah, king of Judah, were present. Jehu drew his bow and struck Joram through the heart. "Right here, on the land of Naboth, the Lord repays you," he declared. Joram died where Naboth had been unjustly killed. Ahaziah fled but was struck down in Megiddo. The prophecy unfolded without delay, but justice was not yet complete. Jezebel awaited in her palace in Jezreel. Learning of Jehu's approach, she painted her eyes, fixed her hair, and mocked him from a window. "Have you come in peace, Zimri, you murderer of your master?" Jehu looked up and called out, "Who is on my side?" 2 or 3 officials. "Look down, throw her down," Jehu commanded. They pushed her from the window. Body crashed below, blood splattered, and horses trampled her. Later, when men went to bury her, they found only her skull, feet, and hands. Dogs had devoured. The rest exactly as Elijah had prophesied. The house of Ahab was obliterated. Jehu ordered the execution of all 70 sons of Ahab. Heads were piled at the city gates. He then destroyed the remaining servants, priests, and false prophets. In one brutal sweep, God's judgment was complete. The blood of the prophets had been avenged. Elijah's legacy burned on. Though Elijah's physical presence vanished from the earth, his spirit never truly disappeared. Centuries later, the prophet Malachi, Israel's last voice before centuries of silence, declared, "Behold, I will send the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of parents to their children, and the hearts of children to their parents, or I will strike the land with utter destruction." This wasn't a return of the old Elijah, but the coming of his spirit, a spirit that would cry out for truth, call people back to righteousness, and prepare the world for both judgment and renewal. Elijah's story is not finished. His fire still calls. From him we learn that even the strongest can stumble. Even the most faithful can feel afraid, alone, and exhausted. Yet God doesn't abandon us in our weakness. When Elijah wanted to give up, God didn't rebuke him. He fed him, touched him, restored him, and whispered truth into his soul. Maybe you're feeling tired, broken, ready to quit. But hear this. God isn't done with you. He doesn't call the perfect. He calls the willing.